Welcome to Optimal Game State. In the previous video, I talked a little bit around a few things I think GW could do when they're making the new edition. That included an update to some of the core rules and some thoughts around campaign and match play. This time we're going to talk about another scenario. What if GW drops the game? If that happens, we're going to be in a bit of a weird space. Now, often what happens when a game is dropped is a few different fans pick it up and work on their own version of the game for a while. So you end up with a bunch of variants, and players who are in the know can pick and choose what they like themselves. If we were really lucky, we might end up with a semi-official group who are well respected and are accepted by the community as a main resource. Their goal would be to keep the game active but with a light touch. Now, for any other game, the first step would be setting up something like Warcry. Now, thankfully, we already have Service Scribe. He has done all that hard work already. Then you would need to work on a regular balance patch. So no game is ever perfect, and it is good to shake up the meta once in a while. That would be something maybe every 6 months. There'd be just a retune of the existing profiles and maybe change around some of the abilities and so on and so forth. Unlike with other games that get cancelled, you would actually still get Age of Sigmar models, and every Age of Sigmar model is a potential Warcry model. So the player design team could release profiles for every new Age of Sigmar model that comes out. That would actually put the game in a great place if we have a core group who maintain the rules, keep updating FAQs, and keep giving us new profiles every time GW releases new miniatures. We are golden. That is just a great place to be. And many other games would be super, super jealous of it. I don't think that would be too difficult either. I am pretty happy with where I've got with the calculated points on the Warcry card generator. Still not perfect, but you can plug in a profile that you feel feels right for the model, and you can get a points cost to go along with it. Often they seem to be about 5 to 10 away from whatever the team have put together. Obviously, there's a completely invented profile, nothing compared against. I do have also put core stats and weapon 1 and weapon 2 with the idea if you wanted to kind of split those out, which we'll look at in a second. But you can put your profiles in and you'll get some points, and then it's just a matter of coming up what feels right, what seems appropriate for any of the new Age of Sigmar models. All right. And then the other complication will be the abilities, but the abilities are bounded within the ability system, so it's actually quite hard to go wrong with it. And as we've seen, the GW designers for new warbands, they tend to use a few existing ones, just rehash them, and then they come up with 1 or 2 unique abilities for the warband, and that's that gets the job done. So some quick profiles for the fighters, some points, and then a few abilities, and then there will be work in it, but it's not crazy work. Anyway, all right. All of that is what the player-led design team could do if they were trying to keep the game alive. Now, what would I do? That's what I want to talk about in this video. And this is going to be a much more drastic approach where Warcry is unshackled from the needs of the company, and instead we push it to be a more customizable and generic game where you can basically play what any miniatures you want and kind of work out something that will still feel very Warcry, but will be removed from Age of Sigmar, if that makes sense. So the idea here is to give the players the tools they need to make the profiles for any models they want, rather than being locked into whatever GW has provided. First thing I would do is I would pull apart the rules and rewrite from scratch. I'm not even talking about the changes I'd like to do here, although obviously that is something I would add in. But the first thing I would do is redo the wording to tighten up the language if I can, but for a different reason. Now, I'm not a copyright lawyer, so take this with a grain of salt. But as I understand it, the language used in the Warcry rulebook is protected by copyright law, but the game mechanics are not. Paizo last year did a complete redo of their Pathfinder game. Now, Pathfinder was based on the D&D 3.5 game, using some of using text drawn directly from the shared document that they had. when they redid Pathfinder, they basically rewrote everything from scratch. So the mechanics and the concepts are the same, but the wording is different. They've taken all the trademarks out. I think that is something that you could do with Warcry. Now, I don't have any intention to sell a new version of Warcry or anything like that, which is what Paizo does with Pathfinder. But it would be good to start with a completely fresh set of text, and honestly might avoid some problems later down the line. We might call it a generic skirmish game, GSG, and then we make all the updates to kind of factor it in. Some of the stuff I talked about in the previous episode, and then we have our new thing that is distinct and separate from Warcry proper. As part of that, I'd probably meddle with a few of the words. So I'd probably change battle groups. I'd probably change rune marks to traits, and I'd probably have them appear as words rather than symbols on cards. Now, alternatively, another option would be to hit up gameicons.net here. As you can see, I've got all the skull icons up. But the options are there. You can replace all of the imagery and all of the art and all the style, and kind of have a completely fresh, distinct from GW rule set. I'd probably also admit the universal abilities and reactions, which for two reasons. So the main abilities, we've had them for about 6 years now. It's probably time for a bit of a redo, and it would cut down on the amount of GW material, because if we're taking those away and kind of finding fresh ways to kind of approach the abilities, then it just pushes it a little bit further away from what a Warcry currently is. Now, one of the bigger challenges is in separating the system from the line of miniatures. So you can see here, recently I picked up this Sisters of Avalorn box for Warhammer the Old World. It is a fantastic kit of 10 elves, which can be built either as the sisters with magical bows and long flowing hair, or as shadow warriors, which I think are super, super cool. They've got swords and bows and have like this shredder, like full metal mask, or more of a cone helmet. Now, at one point, we did have rules for these fighters. The old Cities of Sigmar list had them under the Wanderers. They weren't particularly great, but they existed. They no longer exist because they were replaced, and the Wanderers didn't get a new version. They were just gone. So GW decided they weren't legal anymore, so we couldn't play them anymore. It's a real shame. And also, if you notice that that's a Privateer Press wizard at the very bottom. So obviously, that's a model I really, really like. I'd love to be able to play, but they will have to sub it in somehow. Now, if we did have a player-run design team, maybe they would get around to making rules for this box. And, maybe they wouldn't. Even if they did, the rules might be shite, and they might be no fun to play with. Okay. In a recent video, I covered the wargame Hobgoblin, which I highly recommended. I really, really like it, and I think it merges well with Warcry once you've got enough warbands. So it's got this great quarter game that is really fast and makes a satisfying battle game. So it does have like one roll combat resolution like Warcry does. For this video, I'm more interested in the way you create your profile for your units. So you start by picking a template, so light infantry, heavy cavalry, or something like that. And then you adjust it with positive or negative traits to get a profile that kind of matches the models you have, kind of feels right. I'd like to be able to do something like that with Warcry profiles. Now, to a certain extent, we already have something like that, at least in concept. So, top left, you can see we've got a free gold steel helm. So it's just a random human. We can see he's got 4 move, 4 toughness, and 10 wounds. Now, they do have a shield, and if we can play with that flagellant, we can see that the normal human is basically the flagellant stats, the 4 move, 3 toughness, and 10 wounds. And having a shield, I guess, gives you an extra +1 toughness. Meanwhile, if you look at the bottom, we've got that Lumineth Sentinel. So this is an archer. Doesn't have shield. So we can see the stats. 5 move, 3 toughness, and 8 wounds. So basically the exact same as a human, so the flagellant, but 1 faster and then 2 wounds less. Obviously there's a chunk of difference in points, but we're not going to look at those yet. Those will have kind of weapon considerations that we're not really looking at yet. But the key part is, with a little witchcraft, we can point those profiles out and make a range of fighters of what we think might be, different skill levels. So if I want my Shadowhunter Warband to have a leader, it might be sort of that Elf Prince there. It might be 16 wounds rather than 8. It might have a few champions. We we might have a few champions in Warband. So this is largely the model from Mordheim, where you'll have one leader, you'll have two champions. So in this case, my champion will be those two elf swordmasters. And they'll have a few less wounds. There'll be 14, and then the rest we could take at those 8 wound fighters, or that minor upgrade of 10 wounds. And we've got some point estimates from that. Now, if you're interested in doing that, try and make some fighters with 0 attack in their weapons. So 0 attack dice. So they'll basically do 0 damage, and that should give you a point cost for just the fighter's core stats. The next step after that will be to look at the weapons, which is going the opposite direction. So we can do this in a similar way. So that steel helm had a hand weapon with 1 range, 3 attack dice, 3 strength, and 1 3 damage. Flagellant was similar, but got an extra attack dice. So I guess having 2 weapons gives you an extra attack dice. The Sergeant at Arms had similar gear, but a better profile. So there was 4 attack dice, so 1 more, and the 2 3 damage, so 1 more basic damage. So very, very similar. Now, going through the profiles, what you could do is you could pull out a range of weapons and point them up individually. So here we've got a bunch of potential weapons. Now, I have put stars in the strength. I'll explain that in a second. But the idea here is we've got a bunch of weapons. They're going to cost something. We can get our base profile for the fighter. We can gear them up with some weapons, and now they're good to go. We've got a profile. So, that's it. We've now got some building blocks, and hopefully we can get those points to a point where it makes sense. I think I've got them roughly kind of 50-50, but maybe a fighter should cost more than the weapons, so there might be some retuning to do there. Anyway, this is the idea: components. In addition to weapons, we can also look at a few accessories. We know, for example, that the shield gives roughly +1 toughness, and if we plug it in, it's probably around 5 points. We might maybe up that to 10, and then, which is still less than the 50 to 20 points that the Fortitude Blessing would give you, which does similar, which, to be fair, wasn't particularly popular. In this case, we can also feed in some narrative elements to it. So we know a shield means you're not going to be dual wielding, and we can see that dual wielding is +1 attack, or what we could be looking at as a 2-handed weapon should be doing a bit more damage than a 1-handed weapon. So having a shield has a little bit of kind of an inherent penalty to it. We probably should codify some of the weapon rules. Maybe you have 2 hands for melee and 2 hands for ranged weapons, and you can switch between them. So that would let you have a sword and a shield and 2 pistols, or a 2-handed greatsword and a short bow for your ranged. Now, Warcry normally gives you a pretty big discount on your second weapon. That's not something we're going to include in here. So having multiple weapon sets probably is something we're only going to see in campaign play, where maybe players have got some extra gold to spend. We could also point up medium armor, give it +1 toughness, possibly have light armor the default, and maybe, as we'll talk about later, what we could do is we could actually let the light armor give you the rush ability. So which isn't like that universal ability in theory is already gone. If we take that away, and then maybe not wearing armor lets you get it back again, if that makes sense. And I'll talk about more those kind of things in a second, those kind of concepts. But we could have medium armor that gives you +1 toughness, but costs around 20, so more than a shield. We could give heavy armor, giving you +2 toughness for 30 points, which is very expensive, but reducing movement by 1. So you could then get a pretty chunky, heavy armored warrior with a shield coming in at 6 toughness. And so you can see I have the dwarfs as 4 toughness as the base. So that would be 7 toughness if you went that direction. Stuff you can do stuff there. Now, as a quick note, one thing I would like to do here is I'd like to move the strength characteristic from the weapon to the fighter. Then we'll have the weapons reference that fighter strength. So if I go back to my weapon list, you see I've got it as a star. So a star, -1 or +1 or just star. And that star would be the weapon strength. For some of them, it makes sense actually not to have it. So pistols and crossbows, for example, don't get their strength off of the user. It's off the blast, or it's off the tension in the bow, which is unrelated to the strength of the caster. or the user. So yeah, so yeah, so our random human will be 3 strength, and we might give our heroes 4 strength. So that would be our champion and our leader. So it'll be a little bit better using the weapons than the normal warriors would be. So all this would require a little bit of sleight of hand. Essentially, what we'll do is we'll pick out a human, we'll give him a sword with 3 dice, 2 4 damage, and then we'll see what the point difference that strength will do. So for strength 3, the tool gave me about 80 points, and for strength 4, gave me about 90 points. So maybe +1 strength should be a flat +10, which isn't going to always be right, but it kind of gives us an idea. And then you can price all the weapons from the base of 3. So it will mean at some point it'll be off, but all that makes narrative sense to me. And yeah, it lets us have black powders and crossbows have a fixed strength, and that's a bit of an advantage. So you're probably going to give your crossbows to your and your black powder weapons to your less skilled fighters, whereas the longbow and the sword are going to be a little bit better in the hands of a hero, if that makes sense. Now, what we haven't looked at yet is we haven't looked at abilities. So let's move on to abilities. So the current design approach is to have abilities locked inside a warband. So you pick your warband, which gives you the abilities and then limits the fighters you can take. It is a pretty solid approach, as it gives the design team a lot of control. In this case, what we would like to do is give the players the tools they need to make the warband they want. So we need to loosen this up. Now, there's a couple of different ways you could do it. Like if we want to try and mirror what we had here, we could have you pick from, a number of different options to make your warband list, and then kind of tailor it then yourself. But I'm a little bit more interested in kind of a different style. What I would like to do is I would like to start giving out those traits, so rune marks, but traits to other stuff, so to weapons and gear. So we already see this in Kill Team. Kill Team does have traits on its weapons that have effect, and we are also seeing it in the second edition of Underworlds. So we are getting rune marks on the weapon profiles. Now, this is something I'm expecting to see in the new edition of Warcry, but today we're going to just use them as a fun way of kind of spicing up weapon selection. So, for example, we might have a Warhammer and a Scimitar, both with the same profile of 3 dice, 3 strength, 2 4 damage. If we give the Warhammer the Crushing trait and a Scimitar the Riposte trait, we can then give each weapon a special ability. So, Crushing might be a double that adds +2 strength, showing us hammering down on someone, and Riposte might be a double that does a little bit of damage back to an attacker if they'd missed with all their attacks. So I did talk about in the previous video how we could retool reactions, which is probably something I'll be looking at. Take away the current system, just make them an ability that requires dice and has kind of weird timing. So in this case, after the melee targeting them was rolled with no hits or crits, so they will get to see it, they can then do 1 hit's worth of damage. So it'll just be 2 damage. So basically they do 2 damage for a cost of 2, which I think sounds reasonable. It's not going to be a massive counter like we had seen before, but it's going to be kind of some free damage that they're going to be able to do as a double, which, sounds reasonable if they've got it floating around. But it'll only trigger a specific scenario. Anyway, so we're able to tie and give out special abilities along with the weapon profiles, make the weapons a little bit more interesting, and it also means we actually have a little bit of control over them. So Vexmore is a great example of this, where when we gave Vexmore Onslaught's normally not a problem, it's just +1 attack dice, but when we have a really high damage fighter with just 1 dice, it essentially doubles it, and that's where it comes into be a problem. So we know that Riposte on the Scimitar is only going to do 10 damage. We know that Crushing is only going to give +2 strength on this Warhammer profile. So, I guess it depends on what their strength is going to be, but it's probably going to, at best, change a 3 to a 2 or 4 to a 4 to a 6. Sorry, it's probably going to be a 3 to a 5 or a 4 to a 6, depending what we have, which is going to be great. But we because we have the ability and the weapon attack profile together, we can actually calculate the change in damage and understand what's going to happen. Anyway, there's a bundle of those that we can make and a bunch of different abilities that we can do. One question is how we would handle this with the campaign system. So realistically, you want to be able to play your games, get more gold or whatever the point resource is, and buy more fun stuff and play more games. But, and this has always been a challenge, but we don't want to be in a situation where we're overwhelming our opponent. So how do we balance that? Well, unlike the current version, we probably should always be bringing the same number of points in each battle. So sticking with that 1,000. Now, the advantage here is one that we could have a roster of fighters to pick from. So, that would give us some choices. We'd be able to kind of tailor what gear they have. We'd be able to tailor what fighters we're taking. So maybe you've got an experienced warband that's got 2,000 gold. Points. 2,000 points worth of stuff. I think I was calling it silver. So 2,000 silver or 200 gold. Compared to another one that only has 1,000 points or 100 gold. The exchange rate on silver to gold is dubious here, but let's not worry about that. That would mean there'd be more choices, but on the table it would still be 1,000 points versus 1,000 points. Now, I'd be inclined to add a minor quirk to this. From what I can see with the current Warcry profiles, a fighter with a range attack and a melee attack usually just points up their best profile. In this proposed system, we would be paying points for all of the weapons. Now, obviously, the optimal approach here is just to pick a melee or a ranged weapon and focus on that. But what we could do is have the full cost for the roster, but for the fighters hitting the battlefield, only charge them for their most expensive weapon set. So if the melee set is more expensive, go with that. If the range set is more expensive, go with that and let them have the other half free. Anyway, just a thought, but it's on the idea of having options. So we're going to try and increase by having a roster, we're increasing the fighter and weapon options by allowing a fighter to be, to get that range and melee. It's just an option. So they're probably only going to be shooting with once a turn. They're only going to have 4 turns anyway. So having 2 weapons isn't as much as an advantage as it could be, but it definitely is an advantage because on that first turn, you're going to be able to fight your range attack. And then once you get the melee, you're going to have a great melee attack, hopefully. But it will mean that an experienced warband might have more fighters with bows and swords, while a new warband will just have one or the other. It will make difference, but hopefully not that much. As an aside, the ability dice system didn't appear in Warcry first. The version I'm familiar with was from the Saga War game, where you rolled 8 dice, and rather than groups, you powered abilities based on the value of the dice. So common abilities were 1 to 3, uncommon 4 to 5, and rare abilities needed 6s. And then a few of them required one or the other, or a combination. So maybe you needed 2 6s, or you needed 2 1s and 3s, and 1 4 or 5. Anyway, my point here is that there is some potential to rework the ability system, but for the time being, I think I would leave it as it is. I think it's really tight, and I think it's really hard for abilities to break the game when you've only got so many points to power them with. All right, what's next? Currently, we only have weapon abilities and then maybe some gear abilities, which are very cool. And the key part is we are still powering those off the ability system. So you're just going to have that 6 dice. You're going to, and whatever wild dice you've saved up, and those dice are going to be what power the abilities. I think in some games it gets iffy, gets dubious when you're able to just have things permanently on all the time. But with Warcry, one of the great things about it is you have options, you've got choices with how you're going to be spending your abilities, but the total power of those abilities is essentially being channeled through those 6 dice. Okay, I'm getting off track. We only have weapon abilities. We don't actually have that many abilities. Usually each fighter from Warband would come with their own ability. So let's have a look at Mordheim and Necromunda and see what else we could do here. So both of them do a similar kind of setup where their champions and their leaders have skill groups and can get skills out of those groups based on what they have access to. So I quite like this idea, as it makes the hero the focus of our warband and would let players build out their own abilities. Now, there are some challenges with this. We can actually see some similarities with the hero traits in the current campaign system for Warcry, where usually we only pick the best option. that +1 attack trait is just super good, so why pick anything else? At first, I was thinking of having 6 skills in a group and having fighters pick the skill group that they're interested in and then roll. Now, we might keep that as an option, but not knowing what ability you're going to have starting a fight is kind of weird. And we honestly can't be rolling a new ability every battle. That means if you're playing against someone who has played previous battles, you have to trust them that they rolled into that trait originally. And honestly, at that point, I think it's just easier just to let players pick the ability they want. And we're back to that. Let's just always go for that +1 attack trait instead. Another option comes from Kill Team. So this is from the 2018 edition of Kill Team. It didn't really work out because the idea of it is that you leveled up your fighters or your operatives, and most people only played with the first level of them and never kind of went into the campaign. Anyway, it is quite interesting. So basically, once you pick your speciality, you get that first rank, that marksman ability there. And then at rank 2, you get to pick from one of them. So either assassin or sharpshooter. And then at rank 3, you get to pick from those 4 abilities. But if you picked assassin, you're stuck with Deadeye or armor piercing. And if you went for sharpshooter, you're stuck with mobile or eagle eye. I think that is a really cool way of doing it. So you are forcing people into choices. That second rank or that third rank is going to be better than the second rank. So maybe you want to go through marksman and assassin just to get to Deadeye, even if they aren't necessarily super great. Yeah, I like it. So it does. There's a few things around it that I think is good. Yeah, we can have the higher rank abilities better. As we're keeping everything an ability, even though they're getting more abilities to go on, they still have to pick one to use, so you're not getting self stacking. And we're on that 6 agility or that 6 hero dice or ability dice anyway, so it kind of limits it. I'm thinking we could look at maybe 6 skills, so agility, command, magic, melee, shooting, and stealth. We could take a bunch of the typical triples. So agility might be a bonus move, command a bonus for nearby friendlies, magic could be a bolt attack, melee a cleave, shooting a bonus range attack, 1 less dice, and stealth could be something about avoiding range attacks. Obviously, you have to work through them. There is actually quite a we have hundreds of existing abilities. There should be plenty of scope of ideas in there that we can pull out and just take out the ones that are kind of most common. Like you regularly see those charge abilities, you regularly see the thrown bolus attacks and stuff like that. So it will be a chunky amount of work to do, and getting those skill trees right will be difficult. But it does mean if we give our heroes 2 skill points at the start, they can either choose between level 1 in 2 different trees, or they can get down into that second rank. So it's a bit of a decision, a bit of a choice. And then obviously you can kind of think about combos and, well, maybe not combos, but you can think about, what you'll be building down to and what's going to work. It will be a chunk of work. Initially, what we probably could do is leave out that rank 3 and rank 4. And then just have, rank 4, just pick an extra one, but leave out that rank 3. So you'd have basically 3 by 6. So you'd have to work out 18 abilities initially, and then take another pass on it to get those bigger level 3 ones. So on the table, you would get an ability for each weapon your fighters have. You might get something for your armor or gear, and then presumably each of your heroes are going to have at least one of these, with your leader having a second one. I feel that's a decent chunk. That's a good number of models. It should be relatively modular, hopefully, because the skill trees should be quite descriptive. There's a good chance that your model is going to make sense. So yeah, that wizard model that I had is probably going to have the magic skill. So as an opponent, you can probably recognize that. And she's got a big 2-handed greatsword on the back. So whatever the ability for the greatsword is probably what you're going to expect. So to a certain extent, you should be able to see what's kind of incoming. All right, I think that's a solid do-over. After that, it might actually be worth looking at a sci-fi version of the same rule set. So keep the core rules for the game, so what we're calling Warcry, this generic skirmish game, GSG, keep that in a separate document, and then have your fantasy profiles, abilities, and weapons in one file. And then you can do another one with a sci-fi version, or a modern military version, or where are we going to do it? Now, looking at Kill Team, it might be good to include the engage and conceal orders, um, just generally. I think even in Warcry, you could get some game out of engage and conceal, and it doesn't seem like it'll be too hard to work out. You just have to, put the right token down and beside them. Yeah, weapons. I'm not sure exactly how you do it. In theory, you might just move your bolt gun or your crossbow into a bolt gun, and the game will kind of play out similar. Even though bolt guns are obviously much more impressive than a crossbow, on the actual table, maybe that's how you kind of do the equivalent. Now, maybe working out heavy plasma weapons could be a lot different, but that's something for another day. I have mentioned campaigns. You could do a whole different documents, put together just for that. Indeed, we have, if you think about it, we've got the old 8 points campaign, we've got the Gnarlwood, we've got the new Ravage Coast campaign, we do have a few others. It might actually be nice to have those campaigns down as modules that you can pick from. So to have, rather than having kind of seasonal ones, have all of those up to date. So you can literally just go, okay, today, or for this campaign, we are going to go back and do the 8 points and have your rules ready for them. Right. Okay, so we're into the conclusion, thankfully. This has been a bit of a ramble, but I think there's a few good ideas in here. The key part is to get the players the tools they need to make relatively balanced profiles and warbands to play with. To do that, we need to give them a way of calculating points. And in this example, what we've done is we've made pre-pointed components. To a certain extent, this does lose some character from the warbands, as every warband is basically working from the same options. But it does let us build warbands in more varied ways. As we don't have GW calling the shots, we're basically cursed with this horrible, horrible freedom. In the description, I'll link a few works in progress that I have already. If you're interested, have a look and feel free to add in some comments or suggestions. I still fully believe we are going to see a third edition of Warcry. I think GW would be insane to skip out on this game. I do still like the idea of a generic version of Warcry, though. So even if I see third edition, I'm probably going to still push ahead with this. Because sometimes I want to play the models that I want to play with, rather than just the limited selection that GW has given us. In the meantime, May 4th is just gone. Andor is on TV. So I'm currently on a bit of a Star Wars kick. So I'm going to spend some time painting a few Star Wars Legion models. In the meantime, let me know what you think about this idea of a generic skirmish game in the comments. And we'll see if it goes anywhere and what happens. All right, that's everything for me. Have a great week.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible two-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.